You have no right to wear that uniform or to be in this room. My father said that to me at his Lifetime Achievement Awards ceremony in front of the entire town's fire department. His words, delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel, cut through the applause and celebratory toasts. I stood there in my dress blues, the crisp fabric that had always felt like a shield of honor, now feeling like a costume for a fraud. I wore it that night to honor him, to show the world that the daughter of Captain Arthur Williams was continuing his legacy of service. I didn't know it would be the night he denied that legacy, and me along with it. But what my dad didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the devoted wife clinging to his arm, her face a perfect portrait of shared pride, was the same woman who had secretly discarded his dying mother's last gift like a piece of trash. And for the past year, she had been systematically draining the retirement fund he'd spent 30 years building. My partner, Detective David Chen, had the proof in a thick evidence folder just outside the ballroom doors. And he had something else with him, the living, breathing proof. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story hits close to home. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. My name is Chloe. I'm 30, and this is the story of the night I had to choose between my father's lies and my own truth. Let me take you back to 2 years before that ceremony, the day everything started to fall apart. Before Evelyn, before the silence and the accusations, there was just us. My dad, Arthur Williams, was a firefighter, a captain by the time he retired. He was built like the old oak trees that lined our street, solid, dependable, a man who knew how to carry a heavy load. Our lives were lived in a small timber frame house he'd helped build himself, a place that always smelled of pine cleaner, old leather from his work boots, and whatever my mom was cooking. After we lost her to the cancer that moved through her with the speed and devastation of a brush fire, the smells of the house changed. They became simpler, just pine, leather, and the quiet scent of two people trying to figure out how to be a family of 2 instead of 3. And then there was Buster. He was a golden retriever, the last gift my mom gave my dad, a clumsy, oversized puppy she brought home just a month before her final hospital stay. "He'll look after you," she'd whispered to Dad, her hand lost in the puppy's soft fur. And he did. Buster became the keeper of our quiet grief. He'd rest his heavy head on my dad's lap while he watched the news, his tail thumping a steady, reassuring rhythm against the worn armchair. He'd nudge my hand with his wet nose when he sensed I was rereading one of Mom's old letters, his big brown eyes seeming to understand everything. He was more than a dog. He was a furry, 4-legged continuation of my mother's love. He was the last living piece of her in that house. For 10 years, it was the 3 of us against the world. Dad would come home from a 24-hour shift, smelling of smoke and exhaustion, and Buster and I would meet him at the door. He'd collapse into his chair, and I'd sit on the floor, leaning against his legs, while Buster curled up at our feet. We didn't talk much about Mom, but we didn't need to. Her presence was woven into the fabric of our lives, in the perennial garden she'd planted out back, in the chipped coffee mug Dad still used every morning, and in the soulful, gentle spirit of the old dog sleeping on the rug. I went off to the police academy, came back, and pinned on my badge. Dad was proud. I could see it in the way he stood a little taller at my graduation, his hand resting on my shoulder. "Your mother would have been so proud, Chloe," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. In those moments, our little family of 2 felt whole. We were holding up, just like he'd always taught me. Everything was holding up something else, but I didn't know then that some foundations are built on something you can't see, and they can be rotted out from underneath you before you ever feel the floor begin to shake. The shaking started the day Dad told me he'd met someone. "Her name is Evelyn," he said over dinner one night, pushing his mashed potatoes around his plate. "She's a good woman, Chloe. Lost her husband a few years back. She's got a son, too, Lucas, a little older than you." I remember the careful, almost rehearsed way he said it. He was a man who could run into a burning building without a second thought, but telling his daughter he was dating felt like disarming a bomb. I told him it was okay, that I was happy for him, and I meant it. The silence in that house had been a heavy blanket for a decade, and I wanted him to have warmth again. Evelyn walked into our lives a week later, carrying a homemade apple pie and a smile that seemed to fix things. She was attractive in a quiet, understated way, with soft hands and a warm, honeyed voice that made you want to lean in and listen. She directed all her attention to my father, touching his arm when she laughed, listening to his old firehouse stories with a rapt attention that made him seem young again. She was good. I had to admit, she was very good. She complimented the quilt my mother had made, the one draped over the back of the sofa. "Your wife had such a wonderful eye for color, Arthur," she'd said, running a hand over the fabric. It was the perfect thing to say, acknowledging my mother's place without making it a competition. Her son Lucas was another story. He followed her into the house like a shadow, all restless energy and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was in his early 30s, handsome in a way that felt unearned, and his handshake was a little too firm, a little too eager. He called my dad Sir and talked a big game about a series of startup ventures that always seemed to be just on the verge of taking off. I'm a cop. I've spent my career learning to read people, to spot the inconsistencies between the story they're telling and the truth hiding in their eyes. With Lucas, the alarm bells in my gut started ringing a low, steady hum from the moment I met him. He was a grifter. I didn't know how, but I knew it in my bones. But Dad didn't see it. He saw a young man trying to find his way, and he saw a woman who looked at him like he was the only man in the world. Evelyn was a master at her craft. She never criticized me directly. Instead, she'd use praise as a weapon, a delicate little dagger wrapped in silk. "It must be so reassuring to have a daughter who's a police officer, Arthur," she'd say at the dinner table. "Chloe is so strong and observant, though I imagine it must be hard for her to switch off that investigative mind, even when she's just at home with family." See what she did there? In one breath, she called me strong and hinted I was paranoid and suspicious. She painted my profession not as a service, but as a personality flaw, a lens of constant judgment that I couldn't take off. And Dad, lonely and eager for the simple peace Evelyn offered, bought it completely. "That's just Chloe," he'd say with a wave of his hand. "She's always been a worrier." But the seed was planted. I wasn't his protective daughter anymore. I was becoming a problem to be managed. The changes started small, like a rising tide you don't notice until your ankles are wet. First, it was the curtains in the living room, the simple linen ones my mom had picked out. They were replaced with heavy, dark velvet drapes. "Just to make it a bit cozier in here, sweetie," Evelyn said, her smile never wavering. My dad agreed, said the room felt warmer. Then, my mother's favorite armchair, the one with the slight dip on the left side where she always sat, disappeared. A sleek, modern leather recliner took its place. When I asked, Evelyn had her answer ready. "Oh, the springs were completely shot in that old thing, Chloe. Arthur's back has been bothering him, and this one has lumbar support." It was a perfectly logical explanation, and it made my objection feel selfish and petty. How could I argue against my father's comfort? Every time I visited, another piece of my mother was gone. The collection of sea glass she'd arranged on the windowsill was replaced by a row of generic scent-free candles. The worn copy of her favorite book of poetry vanished from the nightstand. The final straw was the photographs on the mantelpiece. For years, the centerpiece had been a picture of my parents on their wedding day, laughing, young, and impossibly happy. One Sunday, I walked in and it was gone. In its place was a new, professionally shot photo of Dad and Evelyn, posed and smiling against a generic studio backdrop. My parents' wedding photo, along with a picture of me and Mom at the beach, had been moved to a small, cluttered side table in the hallway, almost like an afterthought. Evelyn thought we should update the mantel, Dad said, avoiding my eyes. You know, to reflect the family as it is now. The family as it is now doesn't include Mom? The question came out sharper than I intended. Dad sighed, the sound heavy with a weariness I was beginning to recognize. It was the sound of a man caught between two worlds, and he was choosing the easier one. Chloe, don't start. Evelyn lives here now. This is her home, too. We can't keep everything exactly the same forever. It's not healthy to live in the past. Evelyn chose that moment to walk in, a tray of coffee cups in her hands. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice dripping with concern. She looked from my face to my father's, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I just stared at the empty space on the mantel. It felt like a fresh wound. I was watching my mother be erased, one frame, one chair, one memory at a time. And my father was letting it happen. He wasn't just moving on. He was allowing Evelyn to systematically dismantle the life he'd built with my mother, to tear down the emotional structure of our home brick by brick. And every time I tried to point it out, to show him the load-bearing walls that were being removed, he and Evelyn would look at me with that same pitying expression, the one that said I was the one who was broken, the one who couldn't let go. That was her greatest trick. She didn't just change the house, she changed the narrative. In her version of the story, I wasn't a grieving daughter trying to hold on to her mother's memory. I was a bitter, jealous woman clinging to a past that was holding everyone back. The fissure between my father and me cracked wide open over something as stupid as a speeding car. Lucas had taken to using our long gravel driveway as his personal drag strip. He'd come roaring up to the house in his souped-up Mustang, tires spitting rocks against the siding. It was reckless, and with neighborhood kids sometimes cutting through the woods, it was dangerous. I'd mentioned it to Dad, but he'd just shrugged. He's a young man, Chloe. He likes his car. One afternoon, I was leaving the house just as Lucas came screeching around the bend, forcing me to swerve my patrol car onto the lawn to avoid him. That was it. I got out, my uniform on, my patience gone. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I used my officer voice, calm, firm, and non-negotiable. Lucas, knock it off, I said, walking up to his window. This is a 10-mile-per-hour road, not the Talladega Speedway. You do that again, and I'll write you a ticket for reckless driving. Understood? He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. What are you gonna do, sis? Arrest me? Don't tempt me, I said, and turned to walk away. I never got the chance. Evelyn came flying out the front door, her face a storm of manufactured panic. Chloe, what are you doing? Leave him alone, she cried, rushing to Lucas's side as if I'd just pulled my weapon on him. He was just coming home. Why are you harassing him? Harassing him? Evelyn, he almost hit me. He's going to kill someone driving like that. He's a good boy, she shrieked. You're just looking for trouble. You've had it out for him since day one, always looking at him with those cop eyes of yours. The argument devolved from there, ending with me getting in my car and leaving, my hands shaking with anger. Of course, that wasn't the story my father heard. That evening, my phone rang. It was Dad, and his voice was cold steel. I need you to come over. Now. I walked into a tribunal. Dad was sitting in his new leather recliner, Evelyn on the armrest, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Lucas was slouched on the sofa, looking sullen. Evelyn told me what happened, Dad began, his voice dangerously low. She said you threatened to arrest Lucas, that you tried to intimidate him using your badge, right here in our own driveway. Dad, that's not what happened. He was driving like a maniac. I told him to stop. She said you interrogated him. Dad's voice rose. That you treated him like a criminal. This is our home, Chloe, not your precinct. You do not get to come here and throw your weight around and scare this family half to death. Scare them? I was incredulous. I was protecting them, protecting you. What if a child had been out there? This isn't about a child, and you know it, he shot back. This is about you not accepting them. You not accepting that I've moved on. Evelyn and Lucas are my family now, and I will not have you treating them like suspects in your own home. Evelyn chose that moment to play her trump card. It's all right, Arthur, she whispered, stroking his shoulder. Chloe's just protective. I'm sure she didn't mean to frighten Lucas so badly. It's just that uniform, it changes a person. It was a masterful performance. She had positioned herself as the peacemaker, the understanding victim, while simultaneously reinforcing the idea that my job had turned me into some kind of monster. I looked at my father, at this man who had taught me the difference between right and wrong, and I saw a stranger. He wasn't listening to me. He was looking at me, but he was only seeing the narrative that Evelyn had so carefully constructed, the narrative where I was the villain. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my place in the family. I was fighting against a ghost story, and I was losing. The end came on a quiet Tuesday night 2 years ago. The air was crisp with the first real bite of autumn. I had stopped by the house on my way home from my shift, bringing a fragile peace offering of a lemon meringue pie, my dad's favorite. The visit was tense. Dad was cordial, but distant. Evelyn was a whirlwind of false cheerfulness. Lucas was nowhere to be seen. I stayed for less than an hour, the conversation stilted and painful. Buster, dear old Buster, seemed to sense the tension. He never left my side, his aging body pressed against my leg, his tail giving a weak thump whenever I reached down to scratch his ears. When I left, I knelt and gave him a long hug, burying my face in the thick, familiar-smelling fur on his neck. Be a good boy, I whispered. It was the last time I'd see him in that house. The call came around 11 that night. It was Evelyn, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of hysteria. Chloe, it's Buster! He's gone! What do you mean gone? I asked, my blood running cold. The back door. I think it was left ajar, she sobbed. We just noticed he wasn't in his bed. We've been searching the woods for an hour, calling his name. Arthur is beside himself. Oh, Chloe. You were the last one to use that door when you let him out before you left. The accusation hung there, unspoken but crystal clear. It was my fault. I drove back to the house, my heart pounding against my ribs. I found my dad standing in the backyard, a flashlight beam cutting uselessly into the darkness, his face a mask of anguish. He was just calling Buster's name, over and over again, his voice cracking. He's old, Chloe. he said, not looking at me. His hearing is gone and his hips are bad. He can't survive a night out here. We searched until dawn. Me, my dad, and a distraught-looking Evelyn, who kept wringing her hands and saying, "I just can't understand how that door wasn't latched properly." By sunrise, there was still no sign of Buster. The hope drained out of my father's face, replaced by a cold, hard fury. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were full of a pain so profound it looked like hatred. "He was all I had left of her," he said, his voice raw. 10 years. He slept at the foot of my bed for 10 years. He was the one thing I asked you to be careful with. Dad, I swear I closed the door. I remember checking the latch. Obviously you didn't, he roared, and the sound echoed in the quiet morning air. Or maybe you just didn't care. Too busy with your important police work to pay attention to an old dog. That's not fair. Fair? He took a step toward me, his face contorted. You want to talk about fair? Your mother is gone, and now he's gone because of you, your carelessness. You've been trying to push your way back in here, making everyone miserable, and you couldn't even do the one simple thing of making sure a damn door was closed. Evelyn rushed to his side. Arthur, don't, she pleaded. She didn't mean for it to happen. But he shook her off. He was looking at me, but he was seeing a decade of grief, a fresh wave of unbearable loss, and he had finally found a place to put it all. He pointed a trembling finger toward the driveway. Get out, he whispered, his voice shaking with a final, terrible certainty. Get out of this house, and don't you ever come back. I stood there for a second, frozen, hoping he'd take it back. He didn't. He just turned and walked back inside, the screen door slamming shut behind him with the force of a gunshot. That was it. I was officially an orphan. My mother was in the ground, and my father had just buried me alive. The months that followed were a special kind of hell, the quiet, empty kind. I called my father's cell phone every week for the first 2 months. It rang and rang, then went to a voicemail I knew he'd never listen to. I left one message, just one. Dad, it's me. I just want you to know that I'm thinking about you. I love you. After that, I just let it ring. Hearing his recorded voice was a form of self-torture I couldn't afford. Then, one day, the calls started going straight to voicemail. He'd blocked my number. The finality of that act was like a door being bolted from the inside. I sent texts, birthday cards, a Christmas gift I left on the porch, which I saw in the trash bin unopened the following week. Twice I tried to go to the house. The first time, Evelyn met me at the door, her face a mask of gentle pity. Chloe, honey, you can't. He's still in so much pain. Seeing you, it just reopens the wound. Please, give him time to heal. She said it with such sincerity, framing her gatekeeping as an act of profound love for her wounded husband. The second time, I saw my dad through the living room window. He was sitting in his recliner. He looked up, saw my car, and his face hardened into a granite slab of unforgiveness. He stood up and closed the curtains. That was the last time I saw his face for nearly a year. I threw myself into my work. The clean, simple logic of police work was a comfort. On the job, there were rules, procedures. Evidence led to conclusions. Motives made sense. It was the opposite of my personal life, which had become a chaotic mess of grief and confusion. My partner, David Chen, watched me with worried eyes but didn't pry. He just made sure my coffee cup was always full and had my back on dangerous calls. The guys at the station knew something was wrong. Cops are a family, and they could smell the discord. They'd ask about my dad, how Captain Williams was enjoying his retirement. I'd just nod and say he was fine, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. From the periphery, through town gossip and the occasional awkward conversation with one of my dad's old firefighter buddies, I pieced together the life he was living. Evelyn was, by all accounts, a saint. She tended to him, managed the house, and surrounded him with a cocoon of sympathy. She had successfully reframed the story for everyone. Arthur, poor Arthur, was devastated after his thoughtless daughter lost his beloved dog, the last link to his sainted late wife. And he was so lucky to have Evelyn there to pick up the pieces. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was his caretaker, his protector. The lie was the foundation, and my father's grief was the cement holding it all together. And all the while, as she played the part of the devoted wife, she was quietly, methodically gaining control. He'd always been a pen and paper guy, but she convinced him to do online banking, to make things simpler. She offered to handle the bills, to organize his retirement portfolio. "You just focus on getting better, my love," I could imagine her cooing, her hand on his, while her other hand was already reaching for his checkbook. For nearly a year, I lived with the ghost of my failure. I accepted the narrative because it was the only one I had. I had been careless. Buster was gone. My father hated me for it. It was a miserable, unchangeable fact. My grief was a dull, constant ache. But cops are trained to question everything, and a piece of my brain, the part that wouldn't shut off, kept replaying that night. I knew I had checked that latch. I could feel the click of it under my thumb. The story didn't sit right. It was a case file with a missing page. One sleepless night, fueled by desperation and 3 cups of coffee, I did what I should have done a year earlier. I started calling animal shelters. Not just the local ones I'd checked in the frantic first week, but every single one in a 50-mile radius. I described Buster, an old male golden retriever with a graying muzzle and a slight limp in his left hind leg. For 3 days, I got the same answer. "Sorry, no dog matching that description." I was about to give up. I made one last call to a place called Last Hope Rescue in a rural county I'd barely heard of. I gave the description. The woman on the other end of the line paused. "Wait a minute," she said. "Gray muzzle, bad hip? We called him Old Timer. A woman brought him in about a year ago, said she found him wandering on the highway. He was adopted out a few months later, but he was returned. Said he was too sad. He's still here." My heart stopped. I was in my car 10 minutes later, driving 50 miles under the speed limit because my hands were shaking too badly to go any faster. I walked into the shelter, a loud, echoing place that smelled of bleach and animal fear. The woman led me down a long row of concrete kennels, and there, in the last pen, lying on a thin blanket with his head on his paws, was Buster. He looked up as I approached. His eyes, cloudy with age, widened slightly. He lifted his head, and a low, weak thump, thump, thump of his tail started against the concrete floor. I knelt by the cage door, my hands shaking as I pushed it through the bars. "Buster?" I whispered. He whimpered, a sound deep in his chest, and crawled toward me, licking my hand. It was him. Thinner, sadder, but it was him. I was crying, right there on the dirty floor of the kennel. After the reunion, after I'd filled out the paperwork to reclaim him, I asked the shelter manager about the woman who dropped him off. "A nice lady," she said. "Drove a dark blue sedan. Said she was so worried about him getting hit by a car." A dark blue sedan, just like Evelyn's. "Do you have any security cameras?" I asked, my voice tight. "Just one, out by the front entrance," she said. "But the quality is terrible, and it's from a year ago." An hour later, I was in a dusty back office, staring at a grainy black and white monitor. The timestamp read 11:48 p.m. on the night Buster had disappeared. A dark blue sedan pulled up. The driver's side door opened. A woman got out. Her face was just a blur of pixels, and opened the back door. A large, light-colored dog was pushed out of the car. The woman got back in and drove away, leaving the dog confused and alone in the parking lot. It wasn't courtroom-proof. I couldn't see her face, but I didn't need to. In my gut, in the place where a cop's instinct lives, I knew. Evelyn hadn't found a lost dog. She had created one. I couldn't take Buster back to my small apartment. It wouldn't be fair to him, and more importantly, I couldn't risk anyone seeing him. Not yet. Secrecy was paramount. I called in a favor from an old academy buddy who owned a small horse farm 10 miles out of town. He had an empty, heated tack room that would be perfect. I bought Buster a new bed, the thick orthopedic kind for his old bones, and settled him in. The relief in his eyes was palpable. He was safe. For the first time in a year, I felt like I could breathe again. But the air I was breathing was laced with ice. My grief had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about a lost dog anymore. This was about a calculated, cruel deception designed to isolate my father and sever our relationship permanently. And if Evelyn was willing to do this, what else was she capable of? I knew I couldn't investigate this alone. It was too personal, and I was too close. I needed a partner, someone methodical, detached, and absolutely trustworthy. I needed David. I met him for coffee the next morning at a small diner far from the township line. David Chen was the best detective in our division. He was quiet, meticulous, and had a mind that saw patterns other people missed. We'd been partners in patrol for 2 years before he made detective, and he knew me better than almost anyone. He listened without interrupting as I laid out the whole story, from Evelyn's arrival to the grainy footage from the shelter. I kept my voice steady, presenting it like a case briefing, pushing all the emotion down. When I finished, I slid my phone across the table, the video playing on a loop. David watched it 3 times. He didn't say anything, just stared at the blurry figure pushing the dog from the car. Finally, he looked up at me. His expression wasn't one of pity, it was one of assessment, the look of a cop who's just been handed a very dirty case. "The car matches her vehicle registration," I said. "The timing is perfect. The MO fits. It's her, David." "It's compelling, Chloe," he said, his voice even. "But it's not definitive. A good lawyer would tear that video apart. What do you want to do?" "I want to know why," I said, leaning forward. "This level of cruelty, it has to be about more than just getting me out of the picture. There's something else going on in that house. I can feel it. But if I go anywhere near there, they'll file a restraining order. I need you to look into her, and Lucas, off the books. Run a full background check, financials, associates, everything. I need to know what they're hiding." David took a slow sip of his coffee. Working a case off the books was a risk. If we were wrong, it could cost us both our careers. He looked at me, at the desperation I was trying so hard to hide. We had taken an oath to protect and serve, to find the truth. And my family, the one I had been kicked out of, needed protecting. Okay, he said finally, sliding the phone back to me. I'm in. Where do we start? The hunt had begun. David started digging, and it didn't take him long to hit dirt. The official records on Evelyn were clean on the surface, a widow living on her late husband's modest life insurance policy. But Lucas was a different story. His record was a trail of failed businesses, small-time scams, and, most recently, a mountain of debt. David's contacts in the State Gaming Commission confirmed that Lucas was a known quantity in the underground poker scene and was in deep to some very unsavory bookies. We were talking 6 figures. It was a powerful motive. He didn't just want my father's money. He desperately needed it. The next step was to look at my father's finances, and that was the hard part. We couldn't just subpoena his bank records without probable cause. But David was smart. He found a legal workaround. A few months prior, there had been a string of mail thefts in my father's neighborhood. It was a closed case, but David used the old case number to justify a request for information from the bank, claiming they were following up on potential elder fraud linked to the thefts. It was a stretch, but it worked. The bank sent over the last 12 months of statements for my father's checking, savings, and retirement accounts. We spread the documents across the table in the conference room late one night. At first, it looked normal. His firefighter's pension was deposited on the first of every month. The usual bills were paid: mortgage, utilities, taxes. But then I saw it. It started small. About a month after Buster disappeared, a series of weekly cash withdrawals began. $500 every Friday. Then, a few months later, the amounts started getting bigger. 1,000, 1,500. Then came the checks, made out to cash. They were for large, uneven amounts. 5,000 here, 7,000 there. He's bleeding money, David said quietly, highlighting another withdrawal. And look at the signatures on these checks. I pulled up a file of old birthday cards my dad had sent me, each with his familiar, strong signature. We compared them to the checks. The signatures on the first few withdrawals looked legitimate, but as the amounts got larger, the handwriting got shakier, less distinct. He's either getting sloppy in his old age, or someone is guiding his hand, I said. But I knew my dad. He was the most meticulous man I'd ever met. He wouldn't be sloppy. The pieces were starting to lock into place. Evelyn isolates my father, using the dog as the final, brutal wedge between us. With me out of the picture, and Dad lost in a fog of grief and trust, she gains control of his finances. Lucas puts the pressure on, his debts are piling up, and Evelyn starts funneling cash from my dad's accounts to bail him out. The narrative was clear. This was a systematic, parasitic draining of my father's life savings. But the numbers still didn't add up. Even with the withdrawals, it wasn't enough to cover the kind of debt Lucas was in. There had to be something bigger, a larger transaction we were missing. They needed a big score, David murmured, already turning to his laptop. Let's check property records. My blood went cold. The house. The timber frame house my father had poured his own sweat and blood into, the place where every memory of my mother lived. It was the only real asset he had left. David's fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed the county registrar's database. We both leaned in, watching the screen. And there it was, filed 6 months ago. A home equity line of credit, a second mortgage, taken out against the property. The lending institution was a private credit firm known for high-interest, low-documentation loans. The total amount was for $250,000. No, I whispered. The word came out as a choked breath. He wouldn't. He loved that house more than anything. It was his fortress, the monument he'd built to our family. He would never risk it. Let's look at the paperwork, David said, his voice grim. He clicked a link to view the scanned documents. The application form loaded, followed by the signed agreement. My eyes went straight to the bottom of the last page, to the signature line. Arthur Williams. I stared at it, my police training kicking in, forcing me to look at it not as a daughter, but as a potential forgery. It was good. It was very, very good. The slant was right, the general shape was there, but it was too perfect, too smooth. My dad's signature had a slight hesitation on the loop of the A and a sharp, heavy downstroke on the W. It was a signature formed by 30 years of signing official fire department reports, full of authority and a touch of impatience. This signature on the screen was fluid, practiced. It was the work of someone who had spent hours tracing, learning the shape of the letters, but had failed to capture the soul behind them. It was a lie written in ink. That's not his signature, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it felt like it was freezing me from the inside out. I'll swear to it on any Bible you can find. He didn't sign this. I think you're right, David said, zooming in on the screen. We can send this to a handwriting expert, but I'm betting my pension this is a forgery. This was the smoking gun. This was grand larceny, credit fraud, forgery. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was a major felony. Evelyn and Lucas hadn't just stolen my father's money. They had stolen his home, his security, his entire future, right out from under him. And they had used his love for my mother and his grief over a loyal old dog as the weapon to do it. We had it all now. Motive. Lucas's gambling debts. Means. Evelyn's complete control over my father's life. Opportunity. A grieving, isolated man who trusted her implicitly. And now, the irrefutable evidence. A forged signature on a $250,000 loan document. I leaned back in my chair, the flimsy plastic groaning under my weight. The grief and confusion I'd felt for a year had now been forged into something else entirely, something sharp and heavy and absolutely clear. I looked at David. She's not going to get away with this, I said. It wasn't a question or a hope. It was a statement of fact. It was a promise. All I needed now was the right stage to bring the curtain down on her performance. And I knew exactly when and where that would be. The invitation arrived a week later. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed to the East Penn Township Police Department. Attention, Officer Chloe Williams. It was a mass mailing sent to all local dignitaries and service members. The East Penn Firefighters Association cordially invites you to a ceremony and banquet honoring Captain Arthur Williams for a lifetime of dedicated service. There was a picture of my dad on the front, taken 10 years ago, his face younger, his eyes clear and full of a purpose I hadn't seen in years. The irony was a physical blow. They were giving him an award for a lifetime of service, while the woman sleeping in his bed was actively dismantling that life, piece by fraudulent piece. I dropped the invitation on David's desk. "This is it," I said. "This is the place." He read it, his expression unreadable. "A public takedown, Chloe? Are you sure? This is his night. It's going to be a circus." His night was stolen from him the moment Evelyn forged his name on that loan, I shot back, my voice harder than I intended. This isn't about shaming him. This is about saving him. If we do this quietly, if we go to the house and arrest her, she'll spin it. She'll tell him we've framed her, that his vindictive cop daughter is railroading her. He'll believe her. He'll mortgage what's left of his life to pay for her defense. He needs to see it. He needs to hear it. And it has to happen in a room full of people he respects, people whose judgment he can't question. It has to be undeniable. David was silent for a long moment, weighing the tactical considerations against the human cost. "It's a high-risk play," he said. "If it goes wrong, you could lose him forever." "David, I already lost him a year ago," I said quietly. "This is the only chance I have to get him back." "But I'm not going back as a daughter begging to be believed. I'm going back as a police officer with a case file full of facts. The truth is all I have left." We spent the next week preparing, turning our quiet investigation into an official case file. We got a warrant for Evelyn's phone records and found dozens of calls to Lucas's known bookies. We got a statement from the handwriting expert confirming the loan signature was a highly probable forgery. We documented every cash withdrawal, every suspicious check. The evidence folder grew thick and heavy, a paper monument to Evelyn's greed. The plan was simple, brutal, and theatrical. David would get a warrant for the arrest of both Evelyn and Lucas. He would wait outside the venue, the local VFW hall, until I gave him the signal. I would go in first. I would confront my father, and I would bring a guest. On the night of the ceremony, I drove out to the farm. I opened the door to the tack room, and Buster lifted his head from his bed, his tail starting its slow, happy rhythm. I knelt and clipped a leash onto his collar. "Come on, old boy," I said, my voice soft. "It's time to go home." The VFW hall was packed. The air was thick with the smell of catered roast beef, cheap beer, and old war stories. I stood in the foyer for a moment, my hand resting on Buster's broad, furry head. He was calm, leaning against my leg, as if he knew his presence here was important. I was in my full dress uniform, the one I'd graduated from the academy in. The polyester was stiff, the badge polished to a high shine. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked in. The conversations didn't stop, but they faltered. A ripple of confusion spread through the room as people saw me. First, they saw the uniform. Then they saw the dog. Finally, they saw my face. I saw men I'd known my whole life. Firefighters, paramedics, town councilmen. Their smiles of greeting froze on their faces, replaced by awkward, uncertain expressions. They all knew the story. They all knew I was the daughter who had broken her father's heart. My eyes scanned the room and found him at the head table, seated on a low dais. He was laughing at something the fire chief had said, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked happy. For a split second, I almost turned around. How could I do this to him? How could I detonate a bomb in the middle of his one night of honor? Then Evelyn saw me. Her smile vanished. A flicker of pure, unadulterated panic flashed in her eyes before being instantly replaced by a look of pained exasperation. She leaned over and whispered something in my father's ear. He turned his head, following her gaze. His eyes met mine across the crowded room. The laughter died on his lips. His face, which had been relaxed and open just seconds before, closed like a steel trap. The warmth evaporated, leaving only the cold, hard fury I remembered from that morning in the backyard. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor, and stood up. The fire chief's speech faltered into silence. The entire room turned to watch. My father pointed a finger at me, the same trembling, accusatory finger from a year ago. "What are you doing here?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. He hadn't seen Buster yet, who was partially hidden by the crowd. He only saw me, the source of his pain. Evelyn stood beside him, clutching his arm, playing the part of the protective wife trying to calm her enraged husband. "Arthur, please, don't make a scene," she murmured, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "A scene," my father repeated, his voice dripping with scorn. He took a step forward, toward the edge of the dais. He looked directly at me, and his next words were meant for the entire room to hear. They were the public verdict on my character, delivered by my own father. "You have no right to wear that uniform or to be in this room. Not after you abandoned this family. Not after you lost the only thing I had left of your mother." I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I met his gaze, and for the first time in a year, I didn't feel broken. I just felt ready. "I didn't lose him, Dad," I said, my voice clear and steady. "He was stolen." And with that, I took a step to the side, revealing the old, gray-muzzled golden retriever standing patiently at my side. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a physical sound, a sudden intake of 100 breaths at once. Men who had wrestled with fire hoses and stared down death stood frozen, their mouths agape. At the head table, my father's face went slack with disbelief. The color drained from it, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. His eyes, which had been burning with anger, were now wide with a confusion so profound it looked like terror. He stared at Buster. The whiskey glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead silence. Buster, bless his loyal heart, saw my father. His old tail began to thump against my leg. A low whine started in his chest. He took a hesitant step forward, pulling on the leash, wanting to go to the man he'd loved his entire life. Evelyn reacted a split second after my father. Her mask of concerned wife didn't just slip, it shattered. Her face became a snarl of pure hatred. "What is this? What have you done?" she hissed at me from across the room. I ignored her. I kept my eyes on my father. "I found him, Dad," I said, my voice ringing with the authority of my uniform. "I found him at a rescue shelter 50 miles from here, on the same night he ran away. The night Evelyn claimed I left the back door open." I let that hang in the air for a moment. It's funny, the shelter had security footage. It showed a woman in a dark blue sedan, just like Evelyn's, pushing an old golden retriever out of her car and driving away. Evelyn lunged forward. "She's lying! She's a vindictive, hateful girl who can't stand to see you happy, Arthur! She's using her police power to fabricate evidence." "Evidence?" I said, my voice dropping, becoming the cold, factual tone of an officer reading a report. "Let's talk about evidence." I walked forward, stopping at the table directly in front of the dais. From under my arm, I pulled the heavy evidence folder and dropped it on the white linen tablecloth. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "This is a copy of your bank statements for the past year, Dad. It shows nearly $80,000 in cash withdrawals and checks made out to cash. And this," I said, pulling out the loan documents, "is the $250,000 second mortgage taken out on your house 6 months ago, the one with your forged signature at the bottom." I looked from my father's stunned face to Evelyn's. Lucas's bookie was getting impatient, wasn't he, Evelyn? Was this the only way you could cover his gambling debts? Evelyn's face was a mottled red and white. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled squawk came out. She looked around the room, at the faces of all the powerful men in town, and saw not allies, but witnesses. The back doors of the hall opened. Detective David Chen walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed patrolmen. He looked calm, professional, and utterly implacable. He held up a folded piece of paper. "Evelyn Monroe," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud." He then looked past her, at the corner where Lucas had been trying to make himself invisible. "Lucas Monroe, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud." The room erupted in a low murmur, the sound of a carefully constructed reality collapsing in on itself. The scene devolved into a kind of surreal, slow-motion chaos. The 2 patrolmen moved efficiently toward Lucas, who looked like a cornered rat, his eyes darting around for an escape that wasn't there. He didn't resist, just slumped in his chair as they cuffed him, his bravado vanishing into thin air. Evelyn, however, was not going quietly. As David approached the dais, she wheeled on my father, her voice a desperate, screeching plea. "Arthur, don't let them do this! It's all a lie! She's framing us! Your own daughter!" But my father wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at anyone. His eyes were locked on Buster, who was still whining softly, straining at the leash. It was as if his brain was trying to process 2 completely contradictory realities at once. The dog was here, but the dog was gone. The woman he loved was a savior, but the woman he loved was a thief. He stumbled back and sank into his chair, his hands coming up to grip his head as if trying to hold it together. He looked utterly broken, a man watching the foundations of his life crumble into dust. David was professional, by the book. He read Evelyn her rights as he placed the handcuffs on her wrists. The clicking sound of the cuffs locking into place seemed to echo through the hall. Evelyn's face, which had been contorted with rage, suddenly crumpled. The fight went out of her, replaced by a raw, pathetic terror. The master manipulator had run out of moves. The game was over. As the officers led her and Lucas toward the exit, she passed by my table. Her eyes met mine. They were filled with a venom so pure, it was almost beautiful. "You will regret this," she spat, her voice a low hiss. I just looked at her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a vast, empty quiet, the silence of a war finally being over. With Evelyn and Lucas gone, a heavy, awkward silence fell over the room. The fire chief cleared his throat and mumbled something about taking a brief intermission. People started to get up, talking in hushed tones, not knowing where to look. Their hero, Captain Arthur Williams, had just been publicly revealed as a victim. A fool who had been played by a con artist while he publicly disowned the one person trying to protect him. His night of honor had become a spectacle of humiliation. I walked up the 2 short steps to the dais. My father was still sitting there, staring at the shattered whiskey glass on the floor. I knelt down in front of him and unleashed Buster. The old dog immediately limped forward and pushed his head under my father's hand. For a long moment, Dad didn't move. Then, slowly, as if in a dream, his fingers began to move, burying themselves in the thick, familiar fur. A sob escaped his throat, a dry, ragged sound of a man who had forgotten how to cry. He wrapped his arms around the dog's neck and just held on, his whole body shaking. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. The truth was too big, too brutal. He had chosen the lie, and the lie had almost cost him everything. And I, his daughter, had been forced to burn down his world in order to save him from it. 4 months later, the first snow of the season was falling, thick, silent flakes dusting the pine trees around the house. I sat on the top step of the porch, a mug of hot coffee warming my hands. The front door opened and my dad came out, carrying a second mug. He sat down beside me, a comfortable distance between us. He looked older. The ordeal had carved new lines into his face, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. They were his own again. At our feet, Buster sighed contentedly in his sleep, his head resting on my father's boot. Evelyn and Lucas had taken a plea deal. Faced with the mountain of evidence, they'd confessed to everything. Lucas got a 3-year sentence thanks to prior offenses. Evelyn got 5 years probation and was ordered to pay restitution, though we both knew we'd never see a dime of that money. Thanks to David's quick work with the fraud department, the second mortgage had been frozen and eventually nullified. The legal battle had been exhausting, but the house was safe. It was still ours. We sat in silence for a while, watching the snow. We did that a lot these days. The words didn't come easy, and we'd learn not to force them. Healing, I was discovering, wasn't a straight line. It was a slow, awkward dance of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I found some of your mom's old photo albums in a box in the attic, he said finally, his voice a little rough. Thought we could maybe put some of them back on the mantle? I'd like that, Dad, I said. He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. A few more moments of silence passed. I was so afraid of being alone, he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. He was looking out at the snow, not at me. After your mom died, the quiet in this house was so loud. Evelyn, she filled the silence. I think I would have believed anything she told me, as long as it meant the quiet wouldn't come back. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes full of a pain that was a decade old. That's no excuse for what I did to you, Chloe, but it's the only reason I've got. I reached over and put my hand on his. His skin was rough, the hand of a man who'd worked hard his whole life. I know, Dad, I said. I know. And that was it. It wasn't a perfect apology, and it wasn't a magical absolution. It was just the truth, offered and accepted. It was a start, a foundation we could, maybe, begin to build on again. This story is a brutal examination of how grief can make us vulnerable to manipulation. Arthur wasn't a bad man. He was a broken one. His mistake wasn't in finding new love, but in allowing that love to demand the erasure of his past. He chose the comfort of a well-told lie over the difficult truth his own daughter was trying to show him. Evelyn's evil was not just in her greed, but in her brilliant, cruel understanding of human weakness. She didn't just want Arthur's money. She wanted his entire reality, and she nearly got it. Chloe's journey is one of profound strength. Her pride was both her shield and her prison. By choosing not to fight back initially, she inadvertently gave her enemy uncontested ground. But her ultimate victory wasn't in the public takedown or the satisfying click of handcuffs. It was in her relentless pursuit of the truth, even when she knew that truth would shatter the man she was trying to save. She did the right thing, the hard thing, knowing it would cause immense pain. That is the essence of true strength and integrity. The story teaches us that family isn't just about blood, it's about trust. And when trust is betrayed, the road back is long and quiet, built not on grand speeches but on small moments, a shared cup of coffee, a hand on an old dog's head, and the slow, difficult work of putting the pictures back where they belong. If you've ever felt like you had to fight to be seen by your own family, I want you to know you're not alone. What's the one truth you wish you could make them see? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more.